Good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you are. On this week's episode of Greetings From, we dissect the new Remedy game, Control. We get into the history of the world, our theories, and discuss if the mold should be eaten. Join us as we take control.
Of the Federal Bureau of Control. It is October 20th, 2019, and this is the Greetings From podcast. My name is Mrs. Dr. Casper Darling. That's right, Mrs. Darlings of the world. Go get your PhD and take your husband's job. That is maybe nepotism, but he doesn't need it anymore, and you deserve it. I am also joined by my two very good friends. First, she is the best janitor's assistant that anyone could ask for. The thought for Auntie herself. It's Miss Olivia Quinn.
I just want to eat the mold. Put the mold in my mouth. It smells so good. Yum, yum, yum.
I think they tell you not to do that.
Explicitly.
But maybe do it. For science.
Yeah. Listen, you don't get anywhere by following the rules. The director doesn't know anything. Trench doesn't know anything. Just eat the mold. It's all good.
That's fair. Just eat the mold. So we're endorsing eating the mold on this podcast. Also joining me today, and he'll need your press releases on this incident on his desk by Monday morning. It's the new Director of Communications, Mr. Tyler Smith.
Thank you. I really want to thank Friends and Family for this new position within the Bureau itself. Please do note that we are using eggshell stationery. Any other off-white color will be incinerated.
Question, Tyler. Will you be using an HRA?
Only when necessary.
I would expect nothing less from the next communications director.
Thank you. We now have a new communications director. I do feel bad for employees of the FBC in that the only way to get a promotion is that someone above you has to die.
Yeah.
That really is the only way. You can really rocket up the charts really, really fast, but just some people really, you just gotta let them go. If you love them.
Total power grab. Just become assassin, and you will rule on the top.
Yeah, that seems correct.
Right?
I don't know. Lock somebody in the Ocean View Motel. Push them into the fire.
People just vanish. It's the old house. We don't know.
Leave them in the ashtray maze.
Okay, we're getting ahead here, but do you guys remember that when you're in the motel and then there's just that door and you hear screams and there's just like blood coming from the ground?
Yes.
Yes.
So good.
That's where we put the other employees. They'll be fine. Pretty sure that's pretty standard, really. So, this, for people who are just joining us, this is a podcast about spoilers. We will be doing our traditional Greetings From Spoilercast about the great game of Control that just released a couple of weeks ago, and which we have all played and enjoyed here at our house that no one's at but me. So Control is a Remedy game, and I think we all have some feelings about Remedy. I think several of us are good fans of Alan Wake, which is, I feel like, the most notable of Remedy releases outside of, obviously, Max Payne, the first and the second, but not the third, and Quantum Break, which came out not that long ago. A couple of years ago? Was it originally a 360 game? I don't remember.
I think it's an Xbox One exclusive game.
Was it one of their really early ones when they were coming out with weird shit like Rise? And...
Well, yeah. I feel like I hear that game thrown around a lot whenever that Microsoft initiative, we're gonna make TV shows out of all our video games. And, that was the test case, I think. And then they did that, and it's nope, no more. We're not doing it anymore.
Right.
Which is interesting because I feel like Sam Lake games in general are him trying to make TV shows, and usually there's a TV show in the game too. So I don't know, it could have been something. So what is the temperature in the house on Remedy? Are you guys Remedy fans? I feel like we're Remedy fans. I don't know why I'm even asking you, because I mean, everybody here likes Remedy games.
The only game I haven't played from them. Okay, so I'm not a big fan of the Max Payne franchise. Just not my cup of tea. That's fine. I didn't play Quantum Break. I just never jumped into it. I've heard mixed reviews. It's it's good, but it's also bad. And I'm okay, well, I don't have the time to
To me, that describes all Remedy games. They're good, but they're also a little bit bad.
Yeah, a little bit, right? They're a little weird, but that's not the case with Alan Wake, which I love, although it has its big problems. It's a little bit bad. But listen, all of its other, like, coolness overshadows everything else that's bad about it.
I feel like part of it is like, oh, I love these games and I love their aesthetic and I love what they're doing, but I can't recommend them wholeheartedly to everyone because I'm like, you have to have a very specific taste with these games and be prepared for like a lot of maybe challenging, like not challenging gameplay, but just like difficult to get into gameplay. Like gameplay doesn't really like work with you very well. You kind of have to work against it. And I feel like maybe Control kind of continues that trend. I remember in Alan Wake 1, there's a level where it's like you're chasing after this baby crying and you're walking along this fucking like tightrope of blood. And it's like, that's the whole level. Everything else is black. There's just a tightrope of blood. You hear this baby crawling. And if you fall off, it's like, okay, you restart the level. And I'm just like, why would you do this to me? Why would you make me go through this over and over again? It's been a couple years, so I might be misremembering, but that's like my most standout memory of Alan Wake is like this fucking hallway and you hear this baby crying. It's like his baby or whatever. It's like a flashback. And it's just like, fuck, I keep dying. I keep falling off. Why are we doing this, Remedy? Why did you fuck me like this? How could you fuck me like this?
Did that take the place in your heart of the Old Gods of Asgard level? Because like that was the one thing.
Yeah.
I recently played Alan Wake again. And I like got to that part and I just was sort of hating it because I hate I love the game, but I hate a lot of the combat.
Yes.
And so I got to that point and then I was just like, oh yeah, can't remember why I love this game again, actually.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot about like even in Control where it's like, I think we've had this conversation off the pod, but it's like, hey, even with like, would this have been a better game if there was no combat in it? Like, does the combat kind of inhibit what we're trying to accomplish here? And I think a lot of Remedy games are like, you know, would this have been better as a TV show? Like, what form would have made it a better thing? And I'm like, it's really hard to imagine what a different medium would be, but I'm like, I think the actual combat and the gameplay of Remedy can sometimes get in the way of what I think is interesting about those games.
Yeah, totally. I think that makes sense. We can, I think we all have some feelings on the gameplay and Control.
Yeah, I think
we'll talk about that later.
I think one last thing I wanted to say about like Remedy as a studio was, it seems like Alan Wake was like a Microsoft co-published thing that didn't hit. Like I loved it, and I remember it had like a big media blitz with it, but it didn't really hit. I think the way that they were hoping it would, and then it seems like that same thing happened with Quantum Break, yeah, where they like put a lot of money behind hiding actors, and then like also having this marketing push, and it didn't really hit, and it was kind of like not critically acclaimed. And I feel like I was really worried that Remedy wouldn't exist anymore. And I'm happy that Control is like, you know, being critically lauded for the game that it is.
Yeah, I agree. And since they've recently gotten back the rights to Alan Wake, I feel like a long enough time has passed that the nostalgia has remained for a lot of people. And I think the interest in another game in the franchise from Remedy is out there. And obviously there's a ton of Alan Wake present in Control. So I feel like they're at a good part, like a good kind of place in their history where, you know, coming off the back of Control, the idea is like, okay, well, how can we possibly make this better? Like, how can we make a better Alan Wake? And to me, that sounds amazing.
Yes, I'm here for it. I feel like they hit it out of the park with Control, but they still have, it's always their environments and their storytelling that like kind of get you, and then it's just the mechanics is where they kind of fall flat. Because like a bunch of other games, they're trying to do things that current games are doing, but the other games have done it better, and they couldn't like get the hang of it. I feel like with Alan Wake, it was the same way. They had that unique mechanic of like the flashlight combat, and it was like, okay, that's cool, but like this is also happening elsewhere in a different game in a different way, and it's much more better executed than what it was, and yeah. So we can talk about that mechanics later, though.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that about this thing. I've been thinking, as you were talking through that, was... I know I've shared around the Doc Buford little thing. We could put it in the description, but he wrote a whole thing about not liking prestige games. And I'm not saying that this necessarily applies here, but and I'd like to revisit that when we talk about the gameplay, because... I feel like the things that you're pointing out as frustration, so like the gamey stuff, the mods and the equipment and all of that, like the tasks that the game asks you to do, don't benefit it necessarily, but they're like what every other game does. And so I feel like what that piece really tries to do is talk about, I don't think I like the fact that games are these sort of behemoths now with all of this shit in them, and they're all very samey, and they all are trying to tell some kind of like crazy Oscar-winning story, and on and on. So I think the feeling is that maybe Control should have been twice the story, half the game. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think while we're talking about it, I know we're jumping ahead of our script here, but I just feel like the specifically the mods and then the randomly generated missions, like all of that stuff seemed like a live game kind of feature that's kind of bleeding into a single player game. And it feels like, I'm not sure when that decision was made or why that decision was made, because it just feels like it's a lack of confidence in like the gameplay and being like, oh shit, we need to like actually give people more customization, when it's like, does anyone really want that? Like, I feel like I had the most fun in that game in the last like 5 minutes, where it's like, hey, you have superpowers. And even before then I had like, crazy powers with like, hey, you just kill everything in one shot, make it happen. You actually feel like you are this like paranatural super force or whatever. And I kind of wish that like instead of giving us like these customization options that didn't really affect the gameplay in any way, like they very minutely changed your strategies. Why not just like bump everything up just like a couple notches and be like, okay, cool, you bought all the upgrades, you have everything, you just fucking kill everything in one shot and you're good. And they do that for most of the game, but I just wish that they didn't even have those systems in the first place.
Yeah, I agree. I do wonder if games, not just Control, but games in general, worry about attention spans. Like, I feel like we haven't quite figured out how to keep people engaged without just giving them busy work, you know what I mean? And so I think a lot of games are struggling through this concept now of like, and I'm afraid this is only going to be made worse by some of the payment models we're seeing coming out of like the Apple Arcade, which is like payment is based on how long a person is playing. So we're starting to ascribe a value to how long somebody spends with an experience, which maybe is not the right thing. And so then I think we start seeing these things come and pad out, you know what I mean? It just starts padding. I don't know. I've been playing Destiny again recently, and that is an online game, and so obviously it has to be a level of repetition to get you coming back, but even there sometimes it just feels like, oh god, I gotta do that again.
I feel like the social contract of Destiny that you're making with the developers and their players is like, hey, we all know this doesn't have a lot of content to it, and like you're just gonna try to like keep doing, we're gonna give you a different challenge for the same content and like keep making it happen. Like you just keep running that, that's all we're going to give you. We're going to try to roll out these content blocks, but like, there's limited amount of stuff that we're going to have, which is, that's a weakness of that game. I enjoy it. Sure. And I think that's part of the agreement that we make with online games like that. I just think it sucks that it's that busy work that you're talking about is kind of filtering into these like single player games that really don't need it. Like I started playing Metal Gear Solid 5, and this isn't the perfect comparison, but I think a lot about in that game, like the research, the capturing animals, like, and I'm usually a person who loves those kinds of collectibles, but in certain games it's just kind of like this is too much for me to comprehend. There's no good onboarding, and I think Control doesn't really make it feel like, oh, this is an integrated part of the game. It's like, oh shit, we're just going to tack on these randomly generated missions, and we're also going to give you these mods that aren't really well explained or like really justified in lore at all. Just ignore it, just do it. We're rewriting the social contract of the single player games.
Yeah, it does I don't know. Anyway, we could talk about other games for a long time. I was about ready to be like, and then The Last of Us 2 doesn't have multiplayer, so what does that mean? So, but this isn't a podcast.
Right.
The Last of Us 2.
Yo, fuck prestige games. Fuck you, Last of Us 2. I'm excited for Last of Us 2.
I'm excited for us to do our podcast that we talked about doing about problematic faves, because I have some shit that I need to get out into the world about The Last of Us 1. Anyway, this isn't a podcast about The Last of Us 1. It's about a game that, despite its flaws, I think we all still really liked. So, before we really get in deep, because I think we can get really in deep, obviously this game is plot-heavy and character-driven, which is a lot of very good box checks. Do y'all like the SCP Foundation?
Hell yeah! Hell yeah! Oh, that's my shit! Although, for the longest time, I thought it was Secure Contain Protocol, and that's not what it is.
That is not.
But
I feel like
we're close, though.
It was close.
I feel like the FCP Foundation, I've like read it, and I'm like, I really am into the idea of this like wiki that has all these weird creatures, and I like some of the creatures. I just feel like I've gotten just like clicking like a random monster or whatever, and then getting like some really dumb ones, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, like, you know, it's user generated content, so like not everything's gonna be great. But I feel like I never really like got over that hurdle of like, oh, there's just, this is a chair monster. If you sit on it, it eats your butt. Like, and that's me pulling one out of my hat. That may not, it's not actually a real monster, but that's kind of the vibe I got.
I'm sure it
Probably is at
exists.
least one
Honestly, yeah.
I think the thing that, so this is a strength that I found in Control, but what Control did that I thought was really smart is that it took the SCP Foundation, which has such a crazy broad scope, and just like really honed it in on a very specific, completely normal, atypical, like meme object is cursed. Like, that was it. Where the SCP Foundation is like creatures and concepts and like crazy shit that like could be anything, right? Which is good, obviously, because it's collaborative. But as you said, you can have some real hits and you can have some real misses.
Right.
So for me, like, the SCP Foundation, I had to be onboarded a little bit, and so I had to like read the ones that people think are good, and people will generally go back to those. And, you know, some of the joke SCPs, I think also, if you get into that stuff, makes it really good. Like, there's one that's just like bugs, and the whole thing is like, too many legs, no, terrible, and it's done like completely in the very straightforward style of a normal SCP entry. So like, I think those are, but I don't know, you have to have it curated for you, because if you just sit and go through it, you're gonna run into chair monster who eats butts.
Yeah, it definitely is difficult to like browse. You have to. The only reason why it worked for me is because I got into it through, at the time, creepypasta, or, you know, short horror stories that were on the internet, that were on forums, and so SCP was shared around because people were doing all of this gold mining for me, and so all I had to do then was just like click on the link and like read what everyone was jiving about at that time, and that's how I kind of like got around to all these other things. I believe there was also an attempt at an SCP video game, which...
Yeah, it was recently redone in Unity.
Oh, huh.
It's something.
I will maybe have to go back. Yeah, I'll have to check it out, because I checked it out when it was still like being made and was literally like gray blocks everywhere. But they did do the one SCP story where it's the monster that you always have to be looking at, always at all times, or else it moves and kills you. Yes. Yep. And they did that in Control with a certain object of power. Was it object of power or is it an alternate item? And I was like, I fucking love this shit that they did. It's not a monster, but it's still like the same concept of you have to watch this thing 24/7, cannot blink, or else you get destroyed. So I love that they pulled some inspiration from this very beloved archive of like creepy, weird stories and objects and premises. So
one thing I'd like to plug is I find people have struggled to get into the newer SCPs, like the 3000 level ones, because obviously a lot of the ones that people are used to are like the early 1000 set, right?
Right.
But just one very quick plug. I don't know the person who wrote it, so this isn't an advertisement or anything. But one SCP that I went back to a lot, which I would recommend you read if you haven't, is SCP 3001, which I felt like was a very interesting read after kind of parsing what happens to Casper Darling. Not in a great way, but it is a very interesting read, so I would recommend, we can link it in the description below, but SCP-3001, just go read that one.
Okay.
And then tell me what you think later.
One other closely related kind of like pop culture thing I keep thinking about is Cabin in the Woods. Have you guys seen that movie before?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then like I think specifically the doing rituals as like part of the like, oh, we need to like maintain the balance in the world. And I think a lot about how the evil government organization in that game or in that movie use some of the similar tactics that's in Control. You know, different outcomes, obviously, different goals, but just like this idea of like, oh, they're men in black they're like men in black agents who also worship an old god or have to like do all these crazy rituals to like keep gods at peace. I think that's just a really interesting idea that is explored here a lot.
I feel like the delivery of that in Control was really interesting because the one person who believes in the rituals is like the very dry panopticon director who like chose to work at the Bureau because the benefits at the post office were not quite as good, and then like later finding his treatise on believing that all the objects need to be worshipped in order for them to be contained is like delivered completely stone cold. This is just what he thinks. You know, he's like a total middle manager type. I thought that was...
Yeah.
It's funny because it's like interspersed with like, oh, I want to go to the movies. Like, oh, I was going to watch this movie, or oh, my cat's like having issues. And it's like this guy. And also like, I think you've talked about how he brings up that like, oh, like the people ahead of me got killed. And so then that's how I got my position.
Yeah, he said he worked in middle management for a decade, and then a bunch of people above him were killed accidentally, and he was just promoted because he was the only other person there.
Yeah.
And like the only reason why he stuck around is because the benefits were so good.
I don't know, that just like corporate hellscape is like not even corporate, I guess more like government worker who's been there for years, like semi-dedicated government worker. Like that's just a fun trope to deal with. And then also to have this like, I want to worship an old god, or I want to worship this refrigerator. Like that's just fucking hilarious.
I think your calling on Cabin in the Woods was a good one, because that was not something I had thought of originally, because I get the sense that the one thing that everybody always kind of points back to that's not the SCP Foundation is House of Leaves, which I believe is only because of the fact that the building on the inside is not the same dimensions as the building on the outside, full stop. I think there are other parallels you can make, like in the multi-layered narrative and like found tapes kind of a thing, but I don't know if those things are necessarily 100% direct correlations. Have you guys read House of Leaves? Because I made the mistake of when I was in college, I picked that as my forms book report, not knowing that it was like 600 pages of nightmares.
I have not. I've heard of House of Leaves, but I've never picked it up. I don't know anything about it. So it's interesting to hear that it's now a book of horrors that I should have read. So that might be on my list.
It's interesting.
I think the pitch on this book is like the person's like guy goes into a house, it's bigger on the inside, he can't get out, he's trying to find his way out, and also the book reflects his mental state, like the actual like writing on the like there's like writing sideways, like upside down, like weird things just start happening in the actual form of the book itself. So
that's interesting.
It is like upsetting. Like even all these years later, there's like a quote in the early part of the book when so essentially the book is told from the perspective of a guy who finds the tapes of the people that explored the house.
Okay.
So there's like several layers deep of this narrative. And so you occasionally will hear from the guy himself at the top level before he's talking about the tapes, or like while he's like just kind of getting into the tapes. And there's like one thing where he's just like talking, and then in the middle of it, he's just like, you don't know when it's going to happen. You don't know what's going to cause it. You don't know when it will be coming, but one day, like, the realization that everything is awful and horrible will come hit you, and, like, nothing will ever be the same. And for some reason, I think about that a lot. Like, a lot. Like, a lot. Like, it's been years, and I still, for some reason, have that, like, warning in the back of my head, and
How do you... Because I feel like this game walks the line between, like, a horror game and, like, an action game, and I don't feel like I ever was, like, afraid, because you're empowered to take control and like actually, you know, like defend yourself and like have all these abilities, but things like House of Leaves do scare me, or like creepypastas. I feel like, you know, as much as I try not to admit it, I think that I'll read a creepypasta. Like I think a lot about God, what is that game? My uncle works at Nintendo, which is kind of like a creepypasta inspired. Have you guys played this game before? I'm assuming you have.
I've heard of it.
I think so.
I think y'all should give it a shot. It's like a twine game, but you know, there's actually there's some multimedia elements that you don't expect that start like popping up at you. And it's all about like, you know, a meta narrative in this game, and you have no control. Like you're just getting like, it's like you will die. And like, that's not how this game is. And I'm just wondering, like, did you guys feel any fear in this game? Like what was your emotional state or tenor while you were playing it?
It scared me more early on. Like, I felt Central Executive was, like, the fucking worst. I hated that. I love it. I'm not saying I hate it, but I just, like, for some reason that was really stressful, because I feel like they set the tone for when Jessie gets the service weapon, and then she opens the door back into the hallway, and it's just red. And then there's those 3 guys hanging from the ceiling, and I was just like, oh, no, like, no, don't tell me that's what this game is. And you're right, it does. What's great about it is that it gives you agency. But like every once in a while, I felt like I would go into a room that didn't make sense in the way it was laid out. Like Central Executive, for example, the entire ceiling is like circular overhead lights. So they're just like all of these lampshades at the top. And it's just, I think it's a very stressful environment. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Rows and rows and rows of desks that all look the same, and the building kind of looks the same everywhere, and like stuff seems like it maybe goes places it's not supposed to. Like the layout of the building doesn't really make sense.
I don't know if I like adapted to it as time went on, but I feel like the first like hour or two of this game are like there's that kind of like general haze that you can't really see super well through. Like I think when you're going through dead letters, it's like, oh, how big is this room? Like what can I actually see and how can I navigate through it?
It like spirals. Did you ever look up?
Yes.
It just spirals into the darkness.
And then the letters just magically fall down because that's supposed to be like the portal. That's where it is, and it's where the dead letters, which are just letters that are lost and or sent to the Bureau sporadically about crazy happenings within the world.
I'm sorry. I love that one letter that's just like, yes, I've been having conversations with dead presidents, so I believe the government will need me. Thank you. That's I don't know why that one was like,
you could tell.
Like, yes, Ulysses S. Grant told me about what was happening.
Dude, I'm trying to remember. There's like one dead letter, and I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly, but there's like one dead letter where it's like, oh, the world is turning purple. And then like, or I can't, I'm like, maybe I'm merging a couple of them together, but like he starts talking about like, oh, the world is like turning purple, and oh, I can't stop saying this phrase. I can't look away from this clock or something like that. Like there's a bunch of really unsettling dead letters that are very good.
Yeah. So, you know, we've obviously kind of jumped a little bit into some of the spooky dooky architectural pieces of this game. But I want to take a second to just kind of let's set the stage. Let's spin the yarn. Let's weave the tale, so to speak. Obviously, it would be very difficult for us to sit here and do a book report of what just happened. But we start in the Bureau. We start inside the Bureau. We start with this woman, Jessie Faden, right? We don't really know anything about her. We know that there's some motivation that she needs to be here. She's being called here. And she talks to us. Well, she talks to a you, which is either, you know, it's not really clear. Like, is it us, the player? Is it somebody else? There's sort of a fourth wall breaking happening. And then they put you in the lobby of the Federal Bureau of Control and they go, good luck. Have fun with that. And, you know, we get this sequence of going through the sort of the motions, going past like hearing her kind of internal monologue. We're going past paintings of Trench and Darling and meeting Ati the janitor, and that's when things start to get a little weird. Like the entrance isn't where it used to be, and things start appearing where they didn't used to be, and you start to see documents of things like no smart technology is allowed in here, no trope items, no number 2 pencils. No technology that's more recent than like 1967. That was a heck of an intro, don't you think?
Well, and I love how whenever you enter a new location or area, in big bold ass white letters across the screen, it says like the Bureau or like, you know, the control room or whatever room that you're in. Like it does that, and it sets this like weird precedent that this is like, it's not just a game, like it's like it's this, I don't know, it just makes you feel like this is a little bit more than a game. And it goes back to like Remedy trying to like make a movie or whatever, but like it feels like when you enter a new room or a new location, it's a new chapter of that game, whether it is or isn't. And it's just like it sets this weird precedent for like what the developer's trying to get across to you, and like it gives you this really weird feeling. So
I felt like that is what scared me.
Yeah, I did jump at that.
Like that was what really scared me.
It was. It was that, and then fucking the portrait of Ati with his back turned to you.
Oh, our bureau at work.
Yeah. Because when you walk in, the game starts off. You go in from the outside, this large outside New York, to this very small front desk area, and like in the back on the wall, on this elevated wall, there are 3 pictures. and it's like two of them are this old CEO type guy. He's in a suit, business suit, and then there's one in the middle of the two, and it's this blue. It's janitor in his janitor like overalls mopping, but he's turned around so you can't see his face or anything, and you're like, what's going on with that? Why is he the centerpiece for this front office? And you're just like, what's going on? And of course, you're the only person in this space. You're the only person for a while, until events fast forward, and you're like, oops, I'm now in control of everything.
Well, I think a lot about her inner monologue, because I feel like that isn't done a lot in games, and when it is done, it's like a person muttering to themselves, like, oh, I gotta find the checkpoint or whatever.
Yes.
And it was really surprising. I think
Imagine if this game had been Jesse going, I gotta find the checkpoint the whole time.
I gotta find the control point. I think a lot about how that at first it was like jarring. I was like, oh, is this really going to be what the rest of the game is? It's like her having this inner monologue or conversation with Polaris the whole time. But I feel like I kind of got used to it in a way that I like didn't expect that I would, and they really leaned on it in a way that I didn't think that they would just keep going back to that. And I just think I wanted to call that out from the beginning, because I was like, oh, like they didn't really flinch in terms of like they had this thematic idea. They were going to just like stick with it, that she's going to talk to Polaris the entire game and like always have something to say. Even after you've like beaten the game, she'll keep saying shit. So I don't know. I just think that's a really cool thing I want to call out.
I think what was really smart about the monologue was how they used it early on to build a sense of unease.
Mm-hmm.
Not just in the fact that she's talking to Polaris or you, or you know what I mean, like kind of however you want to read that. But what stood out to me was that when you meet Ati, the janitor, for the first time, so you sort of come around the corner, and you have a back and forth conversation with him where he's like, oh, you must be the new assistant, like you have to go interview, whatever, you're gonna need to go on. And Jessie thinks to herself, or she says this to Polaris internally, she doesn't say it out loud, something like, I'm not going to say no to a friendly face. He could be an axe murderer, but at least he's a nice guy. And then Ati responds to you verbally. He says something like, better a friendly face than like some other shit. And she does not acknowledge at all the fact that he just straight up read her thoughts. And he does that a couple of times. But it's like, it's so subtle that you don't, it just was at first kind of caught me off guard, because I just thought like, wait, like, did she say that out? You know what I mean? It starts you in the cycle of kind of second guessing, which I think is a great way that the game builds atmosphere.
Yes.
And especially in those opening moments.
Everything about Ati, like you're saying, Tyler, everything about that opening moment where you see the picture and then like he's there and he's talking to you. Like I'd kind of gotten a little bit of information about Ati from the beginning, but I think he does kind of like, but from before I played the game, I had people talking like how cool Ati was, and I was like, oh, it sounds kind of weird. And I think the whole game is just so fucking weird, and it doesn't ever take the time to explain itself, which like, we talk a lot about how on other podcasts we've talked about how like being obtuse is like not what you want to do. You don't want to just like hide information from people, but for some reason, I don't know exactly why it works so well here, but maybe just because like there's just so much information that it's like, oh, how could you reasonably explain it? Or like it's just very interesting, the concepts that they like give you. I don't know. There's just like something about the obtuseness of these characters that I really enjoy as well.
Go ahead,
I was going to say it's so Dark Souls is very well known for its lack of explanation, and it has this super vast lore behind it. I feel like Control is the inversion of that, where you have all of this like exposition, but you have no grounding for it, and you're just like have to make the connection yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, you still are like missing pieces, so nothing is ever truly solved. But what were you gonna say, Rebecca? Oh, sorry, I believe you have something.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to comment on that. I think like even the rules of the world are not like static. Like there are no rules. It's all dream logic, which I think maybe, I don't know how Dark Souls is, but I think that that's a very fun thing. Sorry, Rebecca, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. I think a lot of what you're speaking to, both of you, is good magical realism. So like in order for magical realism as a genre to work, it has to believe itself. And I think that's what Control does. It presents a world that it does not have to explain, because it's just how it is. Like it presents a completely stone face with like, why would I explain that? Like that's just how it is. Oh, you don't understand that there's a like that's just how it is. Like that I feel like was sort of revisited time and time again, where it didn't feel like it had to explain itself because it believed in its own world as being like completely and totally normal. And so I think this is referenced a little bit when, you know, in the very beginning monologue, Jessie talks about getting a chance to see behind the poster. So she's using the poster from The Shawshank Redemption as sort of her thing about like what's behind the poster, right? In the movie there was a tunnel behind the poster, obviously, and so she talks a lot about like, well, I got to see it once, but now like what do I do? Can I see that again? How can I get back through that? And like very quickly she gets the service weapon. She has to earn it. You know, in the astral plane, she makes contact with the board for the first time. And, like, her first reaction is just, like, the poster's gone. This place is awesome. This is where I always meant to be. Cool. And, like, it does not spend any time explaining itself. It just is, like, this is where we are. This is what we're doing. And I think that's what's really great about it, is that, like, it's not obtuse because it believes itself. And so all of the information it presents to you is just, like...
matter of fact.
It's just like, the show is. It's totally believable.
Yeah.
Like... I believe this could be a real thing very easily. It believes in itself.
Yeah.
That's the best thing that I have.
I think one thing I wanted to comment on was just like how quickly, like we talk about the intro is just like it's setting up these questions. It's, you know, kind of leading you, giving you a little bit more information, kind of teasing you in. But I think once you actually find Trench and find the gun, it's like, we're going, it's happening. And it's just a million miles a minute at that point. And I just remember when Artie picked the gun up and then it's like, oh shit, there's just pictures of Jessie everywhere. She's the director now. And that's just like the house has reacted. And that's like one of my favorite moments in the game.
Oh, it's so good.
That is a really good moment.
Just that first realization of like, fuck, that's Jessie's face there. How the fuck did that get there? I just think that's just such a good understated moment.
And I love that she never comments on it. Like you can go right by that poster and just be like, okay, that seems fine. That's probably what's supposed to be there. And I think that's also what's good about it, too. It's not like, this thing has changed. It just imperceptibly is sort of happening behind you, whether or not you choose to acknowledge it. So the first person we meet is Trench. He's dead, so it's not really a meeting. And it's kind of like a weird dream logic meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess the first real sort of entity that we meet in this game is the board. Which is like a very strange black pyramid suspended in the astral plane who speaks in riddles. And then we meet the hiss-corrupted people hanging from the ceiling in Central Executive. And then we finally meet Emily Pope, who's like the first completely normal, not messed up, not weird, not anything totally wrong with her human, who was Dr. Darling's assistant. That's how we come to know her. And we learned very quickly that we don't know what happened to everybody else, right? A lot of people are corrupted by the hiss. We get like a very brief introduction to what the HRAs are for. Those, for people listening, those big things people were wearing to... Darling started handing them out for some reason that no one really knows why. And some people decided not to wear them, but no one is really sure what happens if you didn't. And we find out that Trench's staff is missing. So the key players that are keeping the Bureau running, people like Dr. Darling, people like Salvador, Tomasi, and Marshall are all, we don't know where they are. We have no idea. And so you're presented very early on with, and I think this speaks to what you're saying, Olivia, Emily is just like, oh, you're the new director now. Okay, great. You should probably go find Tomasi. Like, he would know where the hotline chamber is so that you can make contact with the board so that you can get your job, because that's your job now. You just have that job. It's fine. Also, can I run some tests on you? What I love is how readily people in the game just are kind of like, oh, you're the director. Oh, okay, cool.
Immediately.
And then that's it.
Yeah.
They don't spend a lot of time hemming and hawing about that. They're just like, yeah, sure.
Which means either a lot of people have been the fucking director, which is true. There have been. If you guys go into that chamber, you see all the portraits of everyone who's been a director, and there's like a lot of directors. Or they just have intense loyalty, and they're like, oh, well, this is what the house wants. So, yeah, why would I question, the loyalty of you being the director? So, because I think we have to mention one thing. The board, to become, it's not just anyone can become the director. So, if they wanted Jessie's job, they could kill her, but, that doesn't guarantee that the board would select them to become the director. You have to be some special selection from the board. Olivia, you want to say something?
I really just get a kick out of like whenever they're talking about the hotline, which is the phone that the director uses to communicate with the board. It's like, do not pick up the phone unless you are the director. Like there's some collectible. Yeah, it's like a assistant picked up the phone and then died immediately after answering it.
Immediately. What were you gonna say?
Okay, I know I'm getting ahead of ourselves, and I'm not. At this point, we could pretty much just talk in any order about the plot of the story, but I have a question about the board that I would like to pose to the collective. With regard to Zachariah Trench, the former director of Control, who we meet, who's dead, and we talk to him sort of through the astral plane phone. Don't ask questions, it's all totally above board. Do you believe that Trench killed himself out of paranoia, or do you believe that the board decommissioned Trench and caused the service weapon to kill him?
Okay, here's something I wanted to ask you guys that I was thinking about with the introduction of the service weapon, because it's like the gun itself changes forms. That's an established fact.
Right.
And then I feel like the gun, whenever Trench has it to his head, because it's like looks a little different than Jesse's gun, but it seems like almost the end of it is speaking. Like I don't know if that's just because it's moving around or something like that, but I always kind of wondered like how does the board interact with the gun itself? And I would agree with that. I would agree with the theory that the board decommissioned Trench because he had already been infected by the hiss, and like he was responsible for all of the issues that ended up happening.
Yeah,
but that's
very possible.
Based on one small piece of evidence that I think the gun was talking and the gun was making was like communicating with people. Tyler, what were you gonna say?
I feel like I'm here for him being decommissioned. I feel like it was more for there was a better suited candidate suddenly within the old house, and so the board was like, okay, we have this better person who, we want her instead of you, so you have to step down, and sorry, there's no like real way to like just you will live on in the afterlife, in the astral plane or whatever. You'll maybe become part of the board itself, who knows, because the board seems to be a collective entity of several people, because the way that it talks, it's like, what are you going to be doing? You are prepared / not prepared. And it's just like weird. The way it talks to Jesse and us is weird. Because it's like they think of every hypothetical situation. So like they can't commit to one thing or the other. It's almost like they're from the future, or they have some sort of time manipulation thing where they can see into all realities.
Okay, real quick.
I know we're going like super way.
No. I think a lot. Okay, so this is. I wasn't prepared to talk about what the board was, but now that we're in it, let's fucking go.
Sorry, I opened that can.
I think. Okay, so I was watching that 4-hour video by My Name Is Bife about the story of Destiny.
Oh my gosh.
And there's a concept.
It's one hell of a video.
There's a concept in Destiny called like paracausal events, which I think fit into our narrative here, and it basically means like, things that don't follow the flow of time itself. So it's like, okay, there's no like for a event to happen in the future, or for an event to happen in the past, something needs to happen in the future. And I wonder if like the board is technically a paracausal entity. That's kind of what I just wanted to throw that out there. Like, they can see into the future and stuff like that. I have no evidence for that, so I'm just kind of throwing shit out here, but I think that's I like the idea of a paracausal entity.
I have some evidence for you, but Rebecca should go first.
Well, you should probably give the evidence, because I'm hung up on the concept of decommissioning directors, so go ahead, and then I'll circle back.
Okay. So this is not like proven or anything, but it's allegedly a theory.
We can say anything we want, and it could be wrong, and it doesn't matter because we said allegedly first.
So we all know that triangles are the strongest geometric form, right? And triangles appear in art history. They are. This is a fucking leap, let me tell you. So, within the Renaissance paintings, of religious.
I wish we recorded our faces during this, because I'm.
Time is a flat circle.
Oh my god. Okay.
Of religious figures, throughout. Anyway, so there's a triangle. This exists.
Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Exactly. Father, Son, Holy Ghost. But that's an upwards triangle, right? But the pyramid is down, So it means that like it could be. It's not that I'm not saying that because it's an upside down pyramid, it's like not powerful or is like in fact it's evil entity. I'm just saying, Control has this very conscious, subconscious, real world, actual plane existence. So the upside down pyramid is just the inversion of our world pyramid. So it's like an upside down pyramid is in the astral plane a very like powerful sacred thing. So like the board directive are an entity, like a very, very high level entity, and the hiss may or may not be the antithesis of that, which is very low, like a devil or whatever, but not necessarily a devil itself, just a deity that wants to gain control, if not even become the board itself. Who knows?
Well, and they're attacking the board. Like that's the hiss's goal is to take out the board. How does that relate to time travel? I guess I'm just trying to connect the dots.
So they're all knowing, right?
Time is a fucking
if they're God, if they're a really high level deity, they are all knowing. They're omnipresent and omnipotent. That's not the right word, I don't think. Anyway, they know everything, right? They're all knowing. This is what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying that he's God, but maybe he is. Who knows? Or they are the board.
Yeah.
I mean, the existence of the slide projector basically means that alternate realities are absolutely a thing.
Right. Correct. Well,
completely canonically true.
Yes. And the fact that Darling also is trapped elsewhere.
Elevated to some other plane of existence.
Dreamlike haze!
And he's totally jacked. But we can come back to that. So,
I'm interested in this idea of the board playing a more direct role, because I'm wondering, like, why does the board even need a director? The board seems to be looking out for humanity's best interests, we think. But I also like how some of these, like, when you're walking in the, like, safe space where there's, like, all the people kind of commenting on things, I like how one of them's like, no, the board's playing us. The board were the ones who, like, let these things in the first place. Like, I think that's just such a, like, the people, the chatter between everyone is kind of, like, playing into these paranoid theories that you may have as a player, which I think is a very good touch.
It almost seems like is the board able to operate outside of the astral plane? Because on the one hand, it seemed like the director was just the means by which they operated and sort of did their bidding, so to speak, in the whatever this version of reality is, not the astral reality,
right.
But this one. So the phone is the only way that you can talk to them, but also other people who are trapped in the astral plane, like Trench, who occasionally calls and gives you tips, and then like that one time that Darling calls you.
Yeah. And I think like, okay, so we're the logic of items here, the logic of how things work. The director gets powers from objects of power that need to be bound to the director. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then the board acts through us, and one of the objects of power that they give us is the gun, the service rifle, the service weapon. So is the board binding themselves to the director to get into like have access? Like, because there's this idea of like binding. Sorry, I know I'm going way off the rails here.
No.
So.
You're not.
Probably.
Yeah, you're probably correct. It's go ahead, Rebecca.
Because the board oversees the astral plane, and so anytime that you're interacting with these objects of power to gain their powers, the board gives you a test to see if you deserve that object. And then it like teaches you how to use it, obviously, because that's the gamey part. But the kind of idea is that it's almost like the board who is saying like, yes, no, you get to do this thing, or yes, no, you did this, or whatever. So they have control over what the director is even able to like bind with in the first place.
Okay. So
I feel
like that speaks to your theory about like the board can't really do anything outside the astral plane, so they need to act through the director.
Correct. Because if it wasn't going to be Jesse, it'd be someone else. They would select whoever, even if they weren't really necessarily worthy of like everything, they would still have to operate through someone else.
But like Trench talks about how he just picks the gun up because there was no one else there to do it. Like, was he the most worthy, you think, or was he just the only person there?
That's what I'm saying. He's the only person there. So like,
gotcha.
They were just like, yeah, we need anyone. Doesn't matter who it is at that point. And then once he was there, he did their bidding, or whatever. He was maybe we don't know too much about Trench, but he might have been very influenceable, like very prone to subjugation. Maybe
Well,
we don't know.
So Trench's backstory is that he brought home an object of power, and it killed his daughter died because of it. Right? That's
Yes.
and then his wife leaves him, and then he becomes like totally focused on work. Like that becomes his only thing that he cares about. Like okay, I just wanted to make sure that then like because that's kind of that's how they get into his brain. That's how they kind of like intercept into his brain, and then they start like kind of manipulating him to do these things. Right? We're all agreeing on that fact. Okay, cool.
Make him paranoid. What I'm really interested in is the concept of the directorship in terms of like, here's an example. So I think in our conversation about rituals, what is an interesting ritual is the concept of the board or the bureau trying to create a prime candidate program where they try to predict who they think the board would choose by trying to find people and then like sort of presciently bring them into the collective under the assumption that they would be they would be good candidates for this directorship based on what they believe the board. So like I wonder if that's something that the board is like, you should go find those people. Here's our job description. Here's a list of qualifications. Go ahead and put that on LinkedIn. Set it to easy apply, like LinkedIn Premium only. You know what I mean? Like I wonder if that's something that's motivated by the board or something that like the ritual of interacting with the board, like people then try to sort of pre-predict their movements and you know what I mean? Because the thing that doesn't make sense to me, if we go with the idea that the board decommissioned Trench using the service weapon, I think the existence of Northmour is a very interesting thing to wrestle with, because Northmour's story is that he was power hungry and was binding himself to like all of these objects and was like he was such an incredible power hungry, literally and figuratively, person that eventually it was decided that he had to be like taken down, basically, by which he was like put into a nuclear reactor, basically. And so what we end up having is this guy who stepped down willingly and is still alive and is no longer the director. And it's not really clear how that chain of events happens.
Did he willingly choose that fate? Because I kind of thought like it was like, okay, you do this or you die, and like they kind of like forced him into it.
Well, I think it was like, yeah, you do this or we kill you.
Gotcha.
But he's still assuming he still chose, like, because I know that what Trench puts it, like, I think in the Hotline Cold Trench says something like, you know, we came to an agreement, like, and we thought it was the best decision. Like, the best thing a director can do is to keep the lights on.
Right.
So we took his power and we put him in a box.
I just got that. I just got that why he says that now. That's very funny.
Yeah. Because they're not very direct about the fact that Northmour's the one running the place. It seems like, I think what is a really interesting trope, especially in the maintenance section, is the fact that it seems like everyone is in on a joke that you don't know. And it, like, I know, I'm sorry, I'm derailing. Let's talk about Ahti for a second. One thing I think is really interesting about Ahti.
No, finish your thought, please. I'm interested, personally.
When you meet Simon Arish for the first time in maintenance, and he's freaking out because, like, you know, he's lost touch with his main person, and he's like, I don't know what's going on. This is all really bad. You have the option to say to him, what's the deal with Ahti? And he's just like, it doesn't matter. He's just really cool to have coffee with. And like, right next to him is a document where it states that someone told him exactly what Ahti's thing is, but like he doesn't need to, like it doesn't matter. Like, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know, but that's it. And so I feel like that automatically is the, like, I don't know, the entrance of the, hey, there's a joke that everybody's in on but you. We're not going to talk about it because you don't really need to know. So, like, the NSC power chamber being the Northmour sarcophagus container, like, it's not really explored until later. And then the only thing you really get before you actually get to go up and see his containment cell is Trench saying, you know, we reached an agreement, and, like, the best thing that a director can do is to keep the lights on.
Yeah. I guess like to kind of go try this back into our original question, which is like, was Trench decommissioned, or like was he decommissioned by the board, or was it some other factor? Because I kind of didn't. I don't think that Northmour, based on the details that we know, I don't think that Northmour was decommissioned by the board. I think that like it always felt like to me, based on the tone and tenor of the writings that we found, that Trench was always the one who was like, I need to be defensive. This is my baby. I'm gonna try to like protect the FBC. And I'm wondering. I'm wondering if that like gives more credence to the fact that maybe Trench wasn't decommissioned. Maybe Trench did actually have that like final semblance of humanity that made him kill himself to like try to like save himself from the hiss. Do you guys think there's any evidence for that?
I do wonder, because one thing that Trench talks about himself, like the way that he was different from Northmore, is that he was like, I wasn't about power. Like, he actively avoided binding himself with objects of power. So he was just like a normal dude for the most part, except for the Surf's weapon. And then obviously the descent kind of into madness. But he was not someone that craved that power the same way that Northmore did, which I think makes him an interesting choice for the board, who maybe was trying to make up for what happened with the previous guy. They picked somebody who was not interested in that at all. And so, I don't know. I feel like he must have had some kind of, I don't know, I hate to say a coming to Jesus moment, but I feel like Darling did too at the end. Like, they diverged very significantly in their storylines. And then it did seem like at the end, both of them had this sort of moment of like, oh shit.
Yeah. And I feel like they're kind of set up to be foils for one another. Like, even though they're on the same team, it's like we have this, like really, really self-obsessed doctor who's like making like videos about himself, like explaining these things, and like he loves being on camera. And they have Trench, who just wants to like stay away from everything and like wants to be in the shadows. What did you say, Tyler?
I said it's so great. The informational training videos that he puts on to just explain concepts to whoever's listening. I'm assuming it's, onboarding the newer scientists. Maybe they had to create these videos because they keep losing people. Like, the turnover rate is very, or I should say turnover rate, the kill rate or whatever is very high.
See, I always thought that he was just making them for himself. Like, he just liked to be on camera so much, and he's like, well, this information needs to get out. Who else would give this information but me, the smartest person in the room?
It's a very Cave Johnson Portal 2 like kind of throwback.
I love, and I think this is good like environmental storytelling. One of my favorite subplots was the rift between Darling and Emily Pope, who is his like direct research assistant, because I feel like we're presented with Darling as this like, he's brilliant, he's weird, he's goofy, he really loves science, he's gonna make all these Bill Nye the Science Guy videos. He's like very endearing and like very likable. And then in the documents and like in the conversations that Emily has and like in some of the later videos, we start to see that like he was maybe a really bad boss and like not great at managing people. And so like, for example, there's a document that you can find when he starts talking about opening up the department to study the slide projector, the one beyond the ashtray maze. And he talks about like who he would want to put on that project. And like the first thing he says is like, oh, I can't tell Emily, like Emily's going to want to be on this, but I can't tell her because she would know. And like, she's going to know if I don't tell her. And like, he's sort of working through those things of like trying to keep her kind of down. And so then there's a level of later when she's having conversations with the director, she's like, oh shit, like, yeah, I don't know, like Darling always did whatever. And so she had like written all of these papers that he'd like shut down. So there's instances where you can find papers that she's written and then his rebuttal, like telling her like, this isn't worth your time, like, well, don't do all this stuff. And so we see her kind of emerging under his shadow as being like, oh, actually we can study all this weird stuff, and oh, actually maybe we should have been doing this the whole time, like, oh, isn't that weird?
We should make knives out of the black quarry, the black rock.
I love that was like her first. I do. But I thought that was interesting.
I do get that like that payoff when I think Jesse asks Emily Pope like, oh, like what did you think about him trying to protect you from this information? She's like, actually, fuck that. No, like I deserve to know. We deal with dangerous shit every day. You can't just withhold this information because it's gonna like protect me, quote unquote. Like I just think you don't usually get that moment of catharsis, I think, from the person who's seeking this information withheld from them. Or like you usually in those kinds of stories you're like, oh, like of course they were protecting me from this. She's like, no, actually I'm an adult, like make these decisions, like I'm not gonna let this dude just make these decisions for me. So yeah, I think that's just cool.
There's a great moment in one of the Darling presentations where he's in the middle of talking through something and she interrupts him, so you hear her off screen being like, open the door, and then being like, hey, I need this thing. And then he's kind of like, oh, the code to the quarry, right? And then he like makes a really offhand joke.
What is it,
and
like
it's just
665
dead
or whatever?
Yeah.
Neighbor of the
Neighbor
beast.
of the Beast. And then like you hear nothing but the door closing. Like I thought that was a really great detail because then he looks at the camera and is like, like we got to do this again. Like we got to start over. It's fine. I thought that was quite good. I think to this point, what's really interesting about the game is that we only. Oh, Merida's so unhappy, Merida, baby, come here. I think one thing that's really interesting. Somebody's gonna have to cut this out.
That's fine.
Merida,
We're good.
Merida. No, you already went out. Come on. I don't know why I had them go out and everything.
It's okay.
Okay. So one thing that I think is interesting kind of along this line of thinking is the idea that, we know Jessie because we play as her and we get the most part of her story. And we know, people like Emily Pope, Simon Arish, we know Marshall we talked to her a little bit. We know people like Langston. But everyone else, so like the kind of old school, the old guard, the old boys club, which is what the game calls them, we only really know them through their documents, through like the ephemera and the stuff that they leave behind.
Mm-hmm.
How did you guys find all of that stuff? There was a lot of it. There's like 240 documents or something along those lines. I believe you get the trophy if you find 120.
Wow.
So there's a lot more.
I thought it
was interesting.
I got a little obsessive with it, and I was like, I got the guide out, and like it's actually really hard to find all of the information because like it's spread across like 5 guides and a Reddit.
I'll send you my list.
I've got them all. I think I've got the finalized list.
Got them all?
I got
Okay.
like 247 or something like that. I can't 100%
Wow.
remember. Yeah, and I got all the secret areas, and I was like, I feel like it was worth it though. Like compared to, I feel like when I look at these completionist tendencies that I have, and I like once I finish it, I'm like, oh, I did it. I don't know if there was any real payoff for it, but I feel like here, getting a chance to be like, oh shit, there's the surfboard that I read about, or hey, this is the airplane that they're talking about. Like getting everything that's referenced in those documents is in the world. So, in terms of the old boys club, though, I think I totally missed those recordings about Tomasi until the very end of the game, and I was like, oh shit, I didn't even have this, and like, Tomasi's a fucking asshole. Like that's just there's no getting around it. He's the worst.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then same thing for like a bunch of the other men who are in control are just terrible. Like they're just like they dug their own graves, and like their hubris is what led for them to fall, and they didn't have any backup plans, and like they made really fucked up decisions. Like even Darling, when he's like, oh, I thought I was gonna like I thought Dylan was gonna be this great thing, and it's like, oh, he really fucking killed somebody, like really killed him, like beyond the point of like this being an accident. And you only, like you're saying, you learn from ephemera, and I feel like it paints a really good, clear picture of like, oh, these are just a bunch of idiots who are like have all this power but have nowhere to go with it.
Right. I'm interested to hear what you guys think of Helen Marshall. I think she obviously is a character that has a lot of mystery surrounding her because we meet up with her. She's like one of the only old boys club members
still around.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah, who's still around, and then also like totally fucking bails. Goes to the core. We don't know what happens to her. But I think what's really interesting about her is that the way that Trent through the hotline kind of talks about his experience with having a team. So he one of the things he says is like, a director has to have a team of people, and his team included people like Darling, who was his sort of counterpart. They were very, very close, and so when he started to become paranoid because of the hiss, like he suspected even Darling. So that's the way that they kind of talked about that was like, it's unbelievable that even at the end of things, he would suspect Darling. But one thing that's interesting is that he calls on Helen Marshall as someone who, like, he felt like she really uniquely understood him. And he kind of articulates that as being like, Marshall especially is someone that just, like, totally gets it. Like, she gets where I'm coming from. She, like, totally gets my intentions. And she's the only person who's still alive, but then, like, the only person who we, like, don't really get to spend any time getting to know. How did you guys find her? Like, did you, like, are you interested in, like, what do you think happens to her? Like, what, I don't know. I'm curious. I've heard some theories about who she is and her role within the story, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think of Helen Marshall.
Olivia, you can go.
I feel like from a purely mechanical standpoint, for this being a video game, like she is a hook for DLC. Like that's
Sure.
what I kept
Definitely.
thinking was that like, okay, we're gonna get the resolution of her story in like one of the content packs that's coming out later.
Yeah.
I think like from a narrative perspective, she's the only person who feels like they have a level of control in the situation and it's kind of holding their own, whereas everyone else is like fuck, I don't know what to do, I don't have like any leadership to tell me where to go, whereas she's the one who talks down to Jesse and is like, hey, listen, like you don't really know what you're doing and I kind of know better than you even though you are the director, and like no one else has that tone with her. And I think that like the only thing I wish we had more of was just characterization of her beyond just like, I'm a gruff badass. And like she talks about how she needs to do something important and that's where she goes. Needs to go check on something important, I believe is the line. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think she talks about checking on a specific thing. And I just feel like she's in the story 1 second and then she's just gone the next. And like it's, they address it at the end of the game. Like the security guy, I forget his name, the duty meet down in maintenance. Yeah, Reach is like, I don't know where the fuck she went. She's just gone. And I just wish that we had gotten some resolution, at least a couple more details about her before this DLC. So, Tyler, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, so when you first encounter her, I love her, first of all. I love her, the way that she, like, walked into the room when you first... I can't remember exactly when you... It's maybe right after you find her and you go into the research section and you're within the, synchronicity chamber. It's when you have to. It's like one of the major puzzles you have to solve within this game. But she walks through the room and she like, commands the entire room, and she's like, I don't know. She had this air about her. I really really like her. She's very like large and in charge. I'm a bad bitch. Don't mess with me, or I'll shoot you in the face. Type of gal, and I like that about her. It's sad that we don't interact with her beyond that, really. And then after that, she's just rumored to be missing, or she's somewhere. But that's about it. I mean, like, there's so little to her. There's a lot to her, but there's so little to her. Again, there's not a lot of context.
I think to clarify my feelings, one thing I think you point to, Tyler, is that like she like kicks ass, takes names. She's here to like make things get done, which is cool. Like I think that in the world of Control and in the world of a person who controls the, defense / like security systems at the FBC, that makes 100%. That makes sense to me. I think I get just really tired of like I'm the gruff military badass, and like that's the thing that I wish. Like this game is so silly. There's so many like quirky characters, and she stands out as the one that's not silly. And I think like she's a good foil. She just doesn't really get a chance to really shine in the story.
Well, if you compare her to, I think it's Langston, who's in control of the Paratopic, correct?
Oh, the Panopticon.
Panopticon, I'm sorry. Unlike him, he's reluctant. He's like, oh, there are all of these missing items that are just out in the world, and someone has to go get them, but not me. And whereas she is like, oh, there's something wrong, I have to go handle it. Like, I'll get on it. Like, that she's that like go-getter, has that go-getter attitude. So even the mold lady is very much like, this is a problem. Yeah, and I will resolve it. I don't have the means to do it, and you need to do these things for me. But she's all business, but I still think that her characterization kind of comes through. She's still pretty silly. Like she's like so single-mindedly focused on the mold. Yeah, that like it just doesn't make any sense. But I feel like there's Remedy does. Even the one-note characters have like a couple reflections of like, oh, there's more to this person, and you don't get that with her, which is I think a disservice to that character.
Yeah, it does makes me wonder what they'll do, because it kind of feels like the Foundation DLC, the first one, is probably where she will come back, because it was implied that she had disappeared in Blackrock Quarry, which obviously we know that's the way to get to the Foundation. I think one question that I have lingering is the relationship between Trench and Marshall, because that's like the one piece that there is no ephemera for.
Right.
I know that Marshall was the one person who was very much anti-Dylan from the beginning. So like the first time that he kills somebody, she's like, nope, let's not do that, and was completely overruled by those above her. And so in one of Darling's later videos, as he's sort of starting to break down, he says, I wish I had sided with Marshall when it was just one person. And so there's this level of, I don't even know how to put it. Like, I don't know. There's a sense that she obviously knows more than what is being let on, but it doesn't really make me wonder what role she served in Trench's group, because it seems like they were even disenfranchising her. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I wonder, the thing we don't see is her perspective of, you know, everybody accepts you as Jesse, as the director, just like kind of without question, except for her. But I wonder what the loss of those other people, sort of what position that puts her in as a character within this world. You know what I mean?
I may be misremembering this, and I want to get your guys' gut check on this, but does she say something along the lines of like, oh, my friend died, or oh, like Trench died, and she's kind of reeling from that at all? Is there any kind of okay, she does say that. I'm like,
I think she does say something where she's mourning what happened to Trench, because it was sort of like, oh, if you're the new director, well, then that means
yeah,
like, you know, we know what happened to Trench. So it makes me wonder what role she played in the whole. So like, as he was going paranoid from the hiss, like, how did that change their relationship? I don't know why I'm like really singularly focused on those two specifically.
I do wonder, like,
but it feels like there's more there,
right? And I feel like there's multiple threats in this game. Like, there's the hiss, there's the fungi, there's also the like the things that follow you back from the astral plane, like
those astral spikes.
Yeah. I just wonder, like, what threat could be more serious than the hiss that she's like, peace, I gotta go check on this thing. Like, I wonder what, like, if there's any hints at what that's going to be that we haven't seen yet, because it seems like that's going to be really central to her story.
Yeah, I agree. So on the topic of the Foundation, we go there. It is in the restricted area of Black Rock Quarry, which obviously is a threshold into like a complete unrealistic time and space. It's like in the space, and there's a sky out there, and you're still indoors, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so as part of Ahti's storyline, when Ahti goes on vacation to his homeland of Finland, we get to go to the Foundation, which is what the building supposedly is built upon, but it also is not in a level of space that makes any kind of sense. And we see that there left behind is this carving of the world tree on one of the pillars of the Foundation, which, you know, implies a lot about what the oldest house is and could be, and, you know, how it exists in reality. And what's interesting is Ahti is somewhere beyond that. So, you know, obviously we're shifting gears a little bit with this, but I'm curious, you know, Ahti is obviously, the painting we saw in the beginning is very strange because he has his back to the camera. He can read and respond to thoughts. It seems like the house shifts at his command. A lot of pictures come up with him again, so pictures will move at his command. So, like, for example, when you come around the first time to his door, there is a poster of him mopping the floor on the door, and when you open the door, it's him in the same position inside, just like on the poster outside, and then the poster disappears. And so I feel like with Ahti, we have this character who obviously knows a lot more than everybody else, and perhaps is not bound by the same rules of reality as everyone else. So I'm curious, who and what do you think that Ahti is in the narrative? He's the janitor, obviously.
I think one detail that I want to throw out there that you can consider is like how, a matter of fact, he's like the clog, my eternal enemy. Like, and I just like crack the fuck up. It's just like, okay, I guess there's just a paranormal entity that's like all about clogging, and it just smells like shit, which is great. Yeah. That's hilarious. And like he's I think we all agree he's obviously some kind of like deity, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So the name
Something.
Ahti refers to a Finnish folk hero, and some people have said it's the Finnish god of the sea, but I didn't check my Finnish folklore story, so allegedly. So obviously the developers who are Finnish are calling on this name for a reason, and are referring to this for a reason. Do you believe that Ahti is an entity of the oldest house, or some kind of manifestation of the oldest house?
Okay,
That's a good question.
I think there's a lot of questions here. I'm sorry, John, I don't mean to talk over you, but I think I want to just talk about how in the service weapon like dossier, they talk about how like, oh, this could be Excalibur, or this could be other like famous weapons from like lore around the world, and how it takes the form that it needs to. And also we get like the oldest house as like Yggdrasil, as like the world tree. And I just wonder, like, are these concepts like, is the oldest house like is the oldest house actually like this paranormal object, or is Ati just choosing to inhabit it? Like, I think that's like a tension that I feel is like, oh, is Ati drawn to this place because like it's, it has all this extra power, or is this actually the source of his power? So that's just what I've been wrestling with. Tyler, let me interrupt you.
No, you're okay. What I've come to understand about the house, and this is just me pulling from what I've been presented in the game, so you have our world reality, and then you have our astral plane, or like the paranormal, realm of where just things is your imagination is what it is, and then you have the old house, and I think the old house is that bridge between the two worlds. Or a bridge between worlds in general, however many there are. The old house is like that linchpin holding everything together. And so that's why it shifts all the time. That's why weird shit happens all the time within it. I like the idea that Rebecca, I think, said of Ati being like a servant of the old house, or like the old house permits him to move within wherever he needs to go, because like we are to the board, maybe Ati is to the old house. So Ati is like some immortal being who's just kind of like, I'm whatever the old house wants to be. It might even be the old house. It's just like he's taking care of this bridge, the old house, and like making sure that it doesn't crumble. He doesn't really care what happens with inside of it, whatever, as long as it doesn't break. Because maybe if it breaks or gets destroyed or something, maybe all reality as we know it is gone. Like everything within the universe and multi-universes or whatever, or dimensions. Who knows? But that's kind of what I've understood the old house to be. Just kind of reading on the dossiers and redacted files. So
I don't know if this necessarily explains. Sorry. SCP break, everybody. I want to talk for a very quick second about SCP-3008, which has nothing to do with Control, but for some reason was something that I thought about quite a bit, and especially now as we're talking about, like, what is the oldest house, what is Ati in relation to the oldest house. SCP-3008 is an IKEA store that the inside does not match the outside, and people who get in oftentimes never are able to leave, because it, like, infinitely replicates on the inside. And so one of the pieces of that story is that there are IKEA staff members who work in this anomalous IKEA, who at night become feral, and the people who live inside have to had formed a society to protect themselves from these evil feral IKEA workers that in the daytime are docile and just say store words like "thank you for shopping" and the store will be closing, and then become evil at night. And so has nothing to do, really, other than that. If you escape from, you can't escape from the IKEA, and I think they said like 15 people in the history of time have escaped from this IKEA. But the one thing that I think is, that I could think of a lot of, is that when the SCPs have a tendency to reference an item, like the key item, and then sub-items as like, for example, SCP-3008 is the IKEA store. SCP-3008-1 is like entities that live within the store, and then like special objects will be like SCP-3008-2. And so like all I could think of the whole time was the oldest house is like SCP-1001, and then Ati is like 1001-1, like a sub object.
Interesting.
I have a question for you guys.
IKEA store.
Because I keep thinking about like I think a lot about old American gods, and how gods function in American gods, where it's like, okay, a god has more power if people believe in it. And that seems very similar to how objects of power work, where it's like, oh, objects of powers are sometimes formed by like altered world events, which are also formed by like, hey, just a focus of energy, like this mimetic energy, or this like shared consciousness, like they get into like Jungian principles and things like that. And I'm wondering, like, the objects exist outside of the house. They aren't born from within it, but they do gather some kind of power, some kind of relationship when being within the house. And I'm wondering if Ati's the same way, where it's like, if we go by American God rules, Ati is a creation of like the, shared consciousness of the people of Finland. And then, go ahead.
I just in that line of thinking, Ati is like the quintessential janitor. So in his own way is like a meme. Because when you think of a janitor, you think of like an Ati, who's sort of like ethnically ambiguous, the outfit, the mop, the, like old headphones, you know what I mean? Like there is a level of shared consciousness to just the concept of a janitor.
Right.
That does make it seem as if Ahti could be that person, could be an object of power.
Well, and I think my point here is that I don't think that Ahti is a creation of the oldest house, because I think that the way that we've seen that objects function, like extra, like paranatural objects function, is not necessarily related to the old house. And I would imagine that gods are also the same way, or like any kind of entity like that. It's like not necessarily from a spawn of the oldest house, but there's some kind of relationship that they have with the oldest house that either empowers them or gives them a connection to other worlds, like Tyler's talking about, where it's like, you know, we have these, God, what is it with all the clocks? What is the, what do they call when things intrude?
It's like the threshold.
The thresholds, yeah. Like, I wonder if Ahti uses the thresholds to get to places more quickly or to draw power from them, something like that. Like, that's my theory based on what we've heard from, you know, what we've read about, and like based on other media that uses similar ideas.
It does raise some questions for me when it comes back to the story of Alan Wake, because Control leans really heavily into Alan Wake as being a part of the Control universe. They explicitly say that behind one of the doors at the Ocean View Motel is the door to Cauldron Lake, and like this is where they're getting pages written by Alan from under the door. There's even conversation that he was a prime candidate at one time. And so I think a lot about the Dark Presence and how the Dark Presence was like manifesting as people. So like the old woman, for example, in Alan Wake. And if an entity or like a concept or a power or like something can manifest in a physical realm as a person, as like does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like that as being an Ahti type. So people who are not necessarily bound to spatial reality, but are like a manifestation of a thing.
But yeah, the old house probably, if you believe it, whatever your thought process is, whatever your unconscious belief is, the old house may project that into reality, or just in general, like sans the old house. If people believe in, you know, the swamp monster will just become a thing because that's what our, you know, people's beliefs are, you know, being projected out into the world, like,
right,
or the universe, not. So,
I guess the thing to consider too about Ahti is not only the fact that he can read thoughts, but also the fact of when Jesse, towards the end of the game, is very briefly possessed by the hiss and is caught in a nightmare of being an office assistant at the Federal Bureau of Control, and people are like mean to her.
And she's doing repetitive tasks all day.
Yeah. Her constant and like the person who keeps sort of reminding her that like this thing isn't real and she's capable and she can like sort of overcome it if she figures it out is Ahti, who seems to not be affected by what's going on and seems to also be like in a sort of waking dream with her. You know what I mean?
Right.
He obviously, like, I mean, we've seen him transcend physical space, and we've seen him, I mean, there's sequences in the game where he talks to you as a disembodied voice.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a level of it, like, he is certainly a presence that I think is what you said, a lot more than what the house is. Because the house's shifts are controlled by those control points, so we don't really see the house shift much, except when Ahti wills it to happen. The only time the house shifts is when he is around. So it almost begs the question if Ahti is perhaps more powerful than the house.
I could see,
probably.
I could see like Ahti's powers are like a different, they like function differently, and like he has like all of these, like just like his ability to enter the foundation and like just exists there, and like maybe that's the weakest point between worlds. I'm not 100% sure, but it seems like he is independent of the house, and they maybe have two different forms of power. But I'm also like, why have a person fight your eternal enemy? Why couldn't you just get rid of the clog if you're like this super powerful godlike person, you know? And that's
training you, because he knows if he doesn't let you, Jesse, fight the clog, that you won't, you know, come to be who you are meant to be.
That's fair. Well, and go ahead.
What if Ahti is part of the board?
He could be.
Because there's a narrative that comes up a lot about how you're his assistant,
mm-hmm.
and how like he can finally go on vacation because you can take over his tasks for him.
I think this begs the question, and it's something I've wanted to get into for a little bit, is like, what is the former? Which, like, for people, because I think about this all the time. Since like the game came out and I ran into the former, which, to give some background, is like whenever there's an object, it's a fridge, if you take your eyes off of it, it'll kill you. It kills the person who's been in there for like a long ass time, like over a day. And so Jessie goes to bind the fridge, and then when she does that, she gets sucked into the astral plane, and then there's a creature which is just a giant eye, and as you're fighting it has these like praying mantis arms that come out and just are trying to crush you as you're fighting, and it's also shooting like little like orbs at you. It's a weird boss fight. But the board talks about this creature as like, oh, I'm not sure if it says he was one of us or he wanted to be one of us, but he is no longer a part of us. Rebecca, do you know exactly what they say?
I don't remember offhand. I think he was a board reject.
Okay.
I think they said that he was part of them and then was rejected.
Like, and
now is pissed off.
Yeah. And like because you fight him twice. He's in 2 objects of power, right?
Yeah, he's also in the flamingo.
Yeah.
Which you fight later.
Okay.
Because if you thought the first time wasn't shitty enough, dude, gets ready for round 2.
Just to sidebar in the flamingo, I was cracking the fuck up when the flamingo's head is just like poking out of the doorway.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very funny image. But I think, like compared to Ati's power, which is more ephemeral, like he can teleport, he can talk to you. The board is like an actual entity in the astral plane, which is like not something that we really see that often, that aren't like those cloud monsters, like the astral spikes, or like manifestations that the board has created. And I'm wondering, like, there's really no good answers on what the former is, but I was wondering what theories you guys had about it, because I think about it a lot.
Well, if you think about just the former being a word itself, it could imply that the extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional being that we fight was maybe before the board, and the board came in and like roosted that thing being out of power, and so now the board controls it. I don't remember exactly what the board said about it. I just, other than like you had just said, like he was one of us or he used to be or something like that. But why call it the former? The former implies that it was something at one point and now it's not anymore. And now it's vying for control or whatever it was in the past it's trying to be again. And we haven't, if you look at the wiki, it says technically we've banished it, but I don't believe that for 1 second. So
there's definitely a lot of players in the astral plane that, and I think this goes for the board too, there really is no clear defined sense of this is a good person or this is a good entity. Mm-hmm. So we have the board who's making the rules about what goes on, like what the Federal Bureau of Control works on, and probably has its hand in a larger scope of what is happening in the actual world at large. And they're never really portrayed as being like good necessarily. We have the Hiss who want to take over the board, but we don't really know why. Mm-hmm. We have the Polaris / Hedron resonance that it's sort of positioned as being good against the Hiss, but is also maybe not good. It's just not the Hiss, so I guess that means it's better. Right. And then we have the former, who's like kind of an asshole and not really sure what, like, does it want to be back on the board? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's a lot of confusing motivations happening in the astral plane, which raise a lot of questions as to what power does the board have, because everything wants it. Everything wants access to that power in some capacity. You know what I mean? So we have like the former is like a spurned entity. We have the Hiss is trying to control it. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and I think about the board as like a tool that's trying to maintain the status quo. Like, and I think the Hiss is a entity that is obviously trying to change things to its own benefit, whether it wants to take control of the board for whatever purposes, also like take down the FPC, which may be just a side effect of it trying to get to the board. And I really do wonder, like, those theories that the people pose in the safe zone, where they're like, the board is turning against us. Like, I really do wonder, like, I don't think the board is necessarily a good thing that has humanity's interests at heart, even though that may be like what people have assumed for a long time. And it's like, it probably knows more than it's letting on. And I don't know, Tully, you were talking about the like the way that it speaks in the riddles, where it's like, oh, like this, do this thing or don't. It like has like the like slash third and has two different meanings always, or like two closely aligned meanings. And I wonder if that's like the board speaking riddles or like a poor connection, or what exactly, where's the breakdown of communication? You know, like is the board withholding information because they're like an extraterrestrial being that has like all of these other powers? If they wanted to speak clearly, they probably could. So I don't know.
Well, that's why it's like, that's why I get the sense of it being more than one person, or like a group of a host of things clumped together speaking to you, and then also it being able to have that foresight, because it can see, or maybe it's not foresight necessarily, but maybe it just can see like alternate realities where you aren't prepared and you aren't the director, so these things can exist simultaneously with you being who you are. So you are prepared, but you're also not prepared. You know, like, so who knows? It's
we're missing a lot of key information about the world.
There's a lot of information.
Yeah.
The one thing that I keep thinking of too is the fact that the relationship between the oldest house and the astral plane is like very thin. So beyond just I touch an object and it sends me to the astral plane for me to, you know, acquire the power that it has. I think of the break room outside in maintenance outside of the janitor's office, where you can, the first time you go through there, you fall through the floor, and you're just in the astral plane, and it's like, hold on, that doesn't make sense. But you can also go back later and float up into the ceiling, into the astral plane again, and just like, it's a secret area. But it just, you know what I mean? There is no transition of like, I touch thing, I get transported. It's just like, I walk through wall and now I'm in the astral plane.
Well, and like the way that they do astral diving is like they hook you up to a chair, right? And like kind of cover your face and make you kind of like meditate. And like, I don't know if they physically transport you, if that's your like mind being transported to the astral plane. I'm not sure if they really make that clear, but I wonder if the proximity to the oldest house allows them to do that, or if it's some other, if it's you as Jesse, because you are the director, you have that connection to the astral plane, you can just like do it, go whenever. I wish we had more clear rules in this dream-like weird astral plane scenario.
Yeah.
It's almost like they have this sensory deprivation chamber kind of thing going on, and maybe being within
they
the
literally
house.
do, right?
Yeah,
in the DLC.
they do. Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
So we'll see where that leads us, I guess. I don't know. It's a mystery.
So I don't even know how to put this. I feel like a couple times we've kind of talked around the idea of Dylan Faden, who is like a very key character in Jesse's ongoing quest. So she comes to the Bureau of Control because Polaris, this entity that's inside of her, guides her there. And she's been on a quest to find her brother after this altered world event that they lived through when they were like very young kids, in which they let out some stuff using an object of power that maybe they were not supposed to. And so we find out that the Bureau of Control came in to control that event. They took the slide projector, and then they also kidnapped, basically, Dylan, the brother, and then let Jesse go free. And we find out later that was Trench and Darling directly who showed up and sort of set that into motion. And so one of Jesse's big motivations is she has this anger and this frustration at the FBC for having taken her brother, for having separated them, and, you know, she spent a lot of time in and out of psychiatric wards and going through treatments and having people tell her that she was crazy. And so, you know, part of her joy at being here is obviously finding out that she's not crazy and all this stuff is actually true, and is all happening around her, right? So her quest to find her brother works out, I guess I would say. And we find out that Dylan was considered to be a person of interest. He was a prime candidate for the directorship. He's somebody who has a lot of power like she does, except obviously they were holding him hostage and training him, and he went kind of insane. And so, you know, Jessie does eventually find her brother, but he's been taken over by the Hiss. He's sort of welcomed the Hiss into him and becomes like a very weird, sentient person, but also hiss talking person that you can go and kind of talk through some motivations with. And he also speaks in riddles, and he speaks like this very dry sense of like, you know, anger and frustration at the FBC, and, you know, at sort of embracing death and giving up Polaris and rejecting that power. So Dylan plays a very small part in the game. He kind of is cordoned off in a room, and you could talk to him like 12 times, and then he runs out of talk points, and then he's just in there, and you can't really talk to him anymore. How did you find Dylan? Did you find the motivation that Jesse had compelling? Like, do you feel like he was worth it? Do you find that the payoff was worth it? I don't mean to speak so dourly, because I thought it was like, ugh.
No, I agree with you. I agree with your assessment that Dylan... I wonder what other drafts of this story looked like where Dylan seemed like maybe the focus of it, and then as they redrafted it and made it more focused on Hedron and like the whole like actual machinations of the FBC and Trench, that Dylan's focus kind of faded. Am I remembering correctly that that's her intended purpose for coming to the FBC is not stated in the first act, right? Like she gets the gun before she says she's looking for her brother. Is that correct? Okay.
When she walks through the door, she's like, "We're here to find my brother who's been missing." I'm fairly certain. I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain. Like she literally walks through the front door, and then she's like, "Yeah, we're here to find my long lost brother. Oh, I heard he was over here."
You see visions of him briefly in the beginning monologue.
Because she's like, "You told me he was here." And
gotcha. I'm misremembering then.
I could be misremembering as well. I know for a fact she said something along those lines, though, very early on, because that was the whole reason of going to the old house in the first place. Which we didn't really note this. It's a little factoid about the old house. You can't find it unless you know it exists. It's not something that normal people can see, which is an interesting thing to think about. It's just like a house in plain sight, but no one knows it's actually what it is.
Did you guys find that document? You can find it later because they don't keep any documents from you, but so when the house shifts for the first time after you talk to Ati and the way forward routes you back through the lobby, there's a new room that opens up on the first floor lobby in the corner, and in that corner office there is a document that talks about what to do if someone stumbles into the FBC by accident. It's like a script of like questions that people have to ask to make sure that the person who's there is not there for some kind of anomalous reason.
I think I stumbled across that. It is pretty hilarious.
Yeah.
While we're talking about the old house, there's a picture somewhere in the game that I remember where it's like it shows the skyline of New York with the oldest house, and I just remember looking at it. It's like so much bigger than everything else in the New York City skyline that I think that's just hilarious. Where it's like, this is giant. This is bigger than anything has a right to be. So I just thought that was a really funny detail. Back to Jesse and Dylan, though, I think that her motivations become muddled because she doesn't seem, for a person who seems so concerned about her brother and wanting to reconnect with her brother and find him, and like she's trying to play that close to her chest. I understand that part of it, but like her internal monologue that we get from her talking to Polaris doesn't really seem super focused like on the urgency of finding her brother. Would you guys agree with that? What did you think about her like sense of urgency and trying to like get those details?
It falls by the wayside.
I would agree with that. Tyler, what do you think?
I mean, listen, if I went to go find my lost sister and I found this house and like gained all these superpowers and then like there was some weird paranormal fucking shit, I would be like, yeah, my sister's totally in the background now.
I'm gonna clean the clock.
I mean,
fuck you, bro.
Yeah. No, but so I mean, yes, I agree that Dylan definitely falls away from the storyline, and I mean, Jesse is always like, "Hey, my brother," but it's always waylaid by Emily. She's like, "Well, yeah, we can get you your brother, but like we can't do it because XYZ. They have to be corrected in some way."
Does she seem like too understanding of the FBC? Because I feel like she, from the interviews that we get where it's like, my brother was taken, I think my brother is here, I think they're the ones who kidnapped him, it seems like she kind of does a 180 and is like, well, like I gotta help these people, like the righteous anger that I would expect from someone losing their sibling and being like driven to the border of like insanity because they think they're being followed and like paranoid. It seems like that animosity is lost really quickly.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say something real quick, Rebecca. I think that I think that her feelings towards her brother are not as strong or as potent as they should be, because even as long as she had been kept away from her brother throughout this entire game, because literally we see her brother for 12 minutes of the whole game, if I found out that, you know, my brother was tortured and all this bullshit, I wouldn't have this neutral stance towards something that I had just maybe a few hours ago picked up. You know, like, why would I have a loyalty to this bureau, even though like I am now in charge of it or whatever? I would maybe change shit around as the person in charge, you know, but it's just like, or I would like not want to be in charge anymore. I'd be like, no, fuck this shit. So, but like, she doesn't have a reaction at all to finding out that her brother has been tortured, experimented on, and now is controlled by this somewhat evil, threatening, supernatural entity. Rebecca, what are you going to say? Oh, I guess I'm sorry. Olivia can say something, and then
I think I just wanted to comment on I really love the character's performance, but I do wonder about the direction that she was given, like the actual actress, in terms of like, you know, a range of emotions, because she always seems like she kind of has like and maybe this is like a Twin Peaks thing, because it's like those characters are always like a one note, like they're like very deadpan, like we're just going to accept what's going on. But she doesn't seem like, does she ever really get super angry about anything or super sad? Like, is there any real like kind of depth to her, you know, characterization of Jessie? I don't think there is, but
I don't think there is. Nothing jumps out anyway.
And she's in like a very heightened, you know, scenario, and I would imagine that like emotions would probably be running high. And other characters have like reactions of like anger, and I have been thinking about this a lot, where I'm like, she is technically a superhero. Like, she has Polaris with her, she can do all these things that like other people can't. So maybe and she's been on her own for years, so maybe that's like influenced her character. But like, kind of feel like if I saw floating people and like I just got a crazy gun that I picked up from a dead guy, I'd be a little freaked out. I'd be a little upset about everything. So maybe that's a weakness.
I think, and I think this does go back a little bit to the Jessie and Dylan relationship, but to me there is a little bit of a failing, and this could be where the game being really sure of what it is runs up against the obtuseness of, you know, some stuff maybe does need to be explained or shown in some way. What I mean by that is, one thing I really, really liked about this game is that it fridges all of its men. So for the first time, we have a game where like all of the men presented to us are either dead, incapable, kind of messed up, and so the only people who are left behind to clean that up are women, basically. So we have people like Polaris, that's portrayed as being like a feminine energy. She's referred to as she a lot, you know what I mean? We have like Emily stepping into the role of that Darling left behind for research. We have people like Langston, who is not capable. He's still alive, but he's not capable, and you have to do his work for him anyway. I think Arish comes around eventually, you know what I mean? He sort of becomes capable over time, but when we first meet him, he's panicking because his like boss is gone and he doesn't know what to do without the boss.
Right.
And so what I was sort of, I think, craving a little bit was when we come in with Jessie, she has this motive to find her brother, and I feel like there is a level of like, that feels like the woman thing. She's caring, she's here to go get him, she's going to take care of the brother, she's going to go save him, and then she doesn't have to. Like, she gets the opportunity to become powerful and become in control and become a leader, and like, we never really get the like, maybe I didn't have to be that person all along, you know what I mean? Like, maybe this was beyond me, or, you know, maybe what I'm meant to be is something larger than this. And so I think on the one hand, we don't get that rumination of like, wow, it really sucks that he was tortured this whole time. But then we also don't get the like, why should I be the one responsible for that? It's just flat. Mm-hmm. It's just like, here he is. Anyway,
well,
you know what I mean?
And I think if we do a feminist reading of the actual like text itself, it's like a very empowering story. And like you're saying, they fridged all the men. The only people who are capable are like, is this woman who's an outsider who has to like come in and set the house right. Right. But I feel like that's kind of understated by the ending, where she's like, oh, my brother, I'm going to fix you. Don't worry. Like, this is my key focus now forever, you know? And like, that's a bummer.
make any sense.
Yeah, because she doesn't seem really focused on fixing him. And I know like there are other priorities. The hiss is going to kill everyone. Like that's a priority, but it just doesn't. The characterization doesn't seem solid. Like it doesn't seem.
That's what I really liked about Pope.
Yeah.
Like Emily, to me, felt very strong in the end. So she comes off as sort of scattered and kind of cold. But then, you know, as she opens up and becomes sort of more friendly with Jesse, we see her being like, fuck the way they ran this place. Fuck the decisions they've made. Throw out all those stupid backdrops that Darling had. We're not putting money into that anymore. You know what I mean? Like, we see someone who steps up and is like, fuck the old ways. I'm not here to take care of people. I'm in charge. I'm going to own it. I'm going to rock it. And that's it. So we have her. And I don't know. I guess I wish Jesse was more Emily in a sort of bad way.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think one thing I want to clarify is like you can, like we talk about like Jesse being a strong character, and I think that, you know, there's that trap of like, oh, women who are like taking leading roles need to be strong and can't have like any kind of compassion. But I think that's true. Like there should be a balance. I just don't think that Jesse. The more I think about Jesse's characterization, the more I'm like, well, like, what kind of emotions? Like she reads the lines, like the lines are there and they're funny. But what kind of like emotion does she bring to those lines, and what kind of like inner development is she having throughout the story? And it really doesn't feel like there's much there, which is, you know, upon further reflection, that's a real big bummer, at least in my perspective. After we've talked about this, the more I keep thinking about Jesse, the more I'm like, oh, I don't know if Jesse was the best character.
It's because it was Dr. Darling. Anyway, so one thing that we've talked about quite a bit, I feel like, and not to segue, because I think, you know, we could talk about the story forever and ever and ever, because there's so many pieces to it. This could be an 18-hour podcast in which we go through every single document and think really hard about how it fits into the sort of narrative at large. But I want to return to the conversation that we started at the beginning of this podcast, which is, you know, this is a game that is a lot of story, and it also has a pointy shooty part, which was okay. You know, I think gameplay has been the thing that everybody has gotten pretty much hung up on, not just because it was a little bit of a technical mess, but also because it wasn't always fun. I don't know if you guys found that. I found there were times where I very distinctly remember not having fun anymore. And that's hard when a game, you know, stops being fun, because then what's the purpose of keeping playing it? To me, I thought the story was strong enough that I felt interested in it the whole time. But I'm curious how you found the rest of it. The parts that should not be named, such as board countermeasures and my least favorite of all, bureau alerts.
Yeah, the combat for me, so again, I'm not a big shooter person, so right off the bat, I'm like not really digging the combat. I feel like I wish that the combat was more scripted, in the sense that once you clear out an area or like gain control of a control point, they no longer spawn randomly. Because that shit's annoying, especially now. Like, you know, I played it a little bit the other day just to run around and like get a feel for the game again, and I was just like, why am I still here fighting these now upgraded, you know, hiss monsters, when all I really want to do is just explore the goddamn, you know, video game? I don't want to kill them anymore. Like, the game is done, and there's no point for me to, you know, be running around. I'd rather just explore this game, this space, with no combat whatsoever. I feel like the real MVP of combat was your telekinesis throw. Like, that was the real deal. It killed everything. Like, once you upgraded it all the way, it does a lot of damage, and like I rarely use my gun. Did not like the gun. Didn't like how it
actively
felt.
tried to not use the gun at all points. I just wanted to throw
Same.
shit.
Yep, that was it. That's all I wanted to do was throw shit. Because it's just not that. Unfortunately, that's like the game's only failing is the combat, the mechanics. So
I do have to give it credit, and I'm sorry, but I have to give it credit for not being a cover shooter.
yes,
Like, it
okay,
could have been
yes.
waist-high walls everywhere, and it didn't do that, and I'm like, thank God
Yes.
that it didn't do that, because I would have been shitty.
How?
But I hated the combat, and the onboarding to the combat.
The onboarding was not good.
I know I've talked about this before. I have one thing I have to say, and this has been driving me crazy, and it still drives me crazy, is the very first boss fight
Yeah.
you have is against Bruno Tomasi in the communications department. So this is right before you get to the hotline. And in that section, you get your first power, which is the telekinetic throw power, which obviously is awesome. And the game sets you up to learn how to use it. And it's super fun, right? Except you can't use it against Tomasi, the boss of the area. And what video game gives you a power, teaches you how to use that power, and then gives you a boss that you cannot use that power against?
It like doesn't seem like intentional design, because I'm like, I could see a scenario where it's like, oh, we've like you've learned this, but not every boss is
we
gonna
foiled you.
Yeah, but like that doesn't seem like it doesn't. I don't want to speak for what the developers' intentions were, but it doesn't seem like enough care was put into that aspect of it, where it was like, hey, we want to get people used to the idea of using these weapons and like kind of like onboarding them with, like you're saying, onboarding them with it. And it doesn't seem like there's any element of that, which sucks. Like that's a bummer.
I would be really interested to know the motivation for the inclusion of Tomasi in general, because you don't kill him in that first fight, but you get the option to fight him again later in the turntable area. And the thing that was frustrating to me about that is that you cannot fight him the way you fight other things. So the game sets you up to play fast, super fast. You're throwing, you're dodging, you're zipping around, you're flying around, whatever, right? I think the Mold 1 boss is a good example of this. That's a very fast, aggressive fight. The Anchor is a very fast, aggressive fight. And then the Tomasi fight is like, you really can't run and gun him because he will kill you. So you kind of have to like take it real slow and just kind of pot shot him. And you know what I mean? Like, it felt like such a weird way to play that game.
Mm-hmm.
But playing it that way made that boss fight like super duper easy, whereas playing it the way that I thought the game wanted you to play it was like the worst thing you could have done. It was so hard, it was almost impossible. Did you guys find you hit a lot of difficulty spikes? Like, did you find that the combat was like easy hard kind of in spurts?
I feel like I put a lot of time into just like upgrading all my shit. Like once my pistol was nearly fully upgraded, it was like, okay, cool, this thing is unstoppable. Even though I don't like to use it, I just like throw things, and like maxing out my throwing weapon was pretty good. But like the Tomasi fight, I almost put the game down at that point. I was like, fuck this sucks, I dislike this. And then when you're going through the quarry the first time, and you're like, just like, I feel like the astral spikes are just so stressful to me because there's nothing you can really do to like deal with them, and then there's like 4 of them down there. Like that's just a lot of things. And that last boss fight, like it's like before the last boss fight when you're in the Hedron room and you're trying to like turn off the inhibitors or whatever. Like I stayed up to like 4 a.m. playing the game, and I almost was like, fuck this, I'm not going to finish it today. It's not getting done this weekend because that boss fight's terrible.
I hit that same exact wall.
When it came to the really big fights, it was a thing. Because the other thing is, this game, as beautiful and wonderful as it is, I'm on PC, and every time I die, it's a good 2-minute load time.
Yeah.
And then, like, I die within the next, maybe minute, 30 seconds, whatever. Like, I'm dying more frequently than I am loading. And it was just like, such a nightmare. And also, you're talking about difficulty spikes. You can miss key powers. I ran like 75% of the game with no shield, with no dash, and like
I didn't even know that was possible.
The dash is next level.
The dash is like essential, super essential. Like it should be one of the first things. Like after you get the throw power, you should get the fucking dash power, and then the levitate power. Because I don't know why they didn't make those power missions like a key quest mission, not presented as side quests. Because I would not have had those powers otherwise. Because I just was like, let me just like get through the main mission and no big deal. And you can do the main mission without the powers, but like, God, at what cost?
That's another example of an onboarding issue that you bring up, because the shield in particular is a side quest that's locked behind hiss nodes.
Yes.
And hiss nodes are not really introduced until you do the bureau alert for hiss nodes, but it still doesn't explain what they are. It just sort of teaches you kind of that these are a thing that exist. And so if you were presented with those nodes, you could just look at them like I did, and which I think you probably did too, Tyler, and just go like, I don't know.
It's a
and
gate.
never
It's
get that power.
yeah. Like I'll come back to this later.
I have no idea what they were fucking for.
Because it's so for people to know, these hiss like nodes, they're this big ass red flashy pulsy like wall of just red shit, and if you approach it, it screams at you like, "Ah, go away!" And you're like, "Okay, I can't enter."
Well,
it's saying no.
And the nostalgia, what is it? The nostalgia room where the slide projector is kept.
Yes.
In is it in administration? It's wherever it is, like in the first part of the game when you go towards it.
Yeah, and it's in executive.
Yeah, and like
it's in the cafeteria.
You go towards it, and then it's like Hedron's like, no, don't go that. Like you start getting damage, and you're like, oh, Hedron, don't go that way.
Yeah.
And then the hiss walls have a very similar look to them, and it's like, I don't know, that feels like it got me confused about which direction I should actually go, and what, like, oh, is this not something I can do yet? Like, I'll eventually get a power to get past this. I don't know.
Yeah, because
it did feel like a fake out.
Yeah,
for sure. Because it does a few things like with the mold. The mold is completely optional. You understand that like when you enter a moldy area, you will start to take damage, and so it's like you should not be here yet. But there's a part in the game where like you can do the quest for the mold, and once you do that, then the mold no longer hurts you. So these mold areas are trivial now. So it's gating you in that sense because it's supposed to be like for higher levels of gameplay or whatever. But like you can totally go do the mold right out the gate too, and like not have it be an issue. But yeah, the difficulty spikes are all about, and it's just some weird mechanical choices to make as a game dev. So I don't know if it was because they wanted to make the transition. I know we were talking about like bureau alerts and like the generating side missions. I don't know if they had somewhere in the line of production, if they had in mind that this game was going to be like an online game or a multiplayer game or some sort of component where you needed to collect schematics and like little components for like, upgrades and stuff. You know, like gamification, gamey shit. That would be a normal video game, or not a normal video game, but just in an online video game. I don't know.
Yeah.
What are your guys' thoughts on that? Because
I mean, I think it's just something they tacked on. Like we talked about this a little bit, but it's just like, oh, we're gonna put in mods, we're gonna put in like a crafting system for upgrades, and we're gonna put in this like these randomly generated missions. Just I feel like they were like, fuck, we don't have enough game here. We need to like create some kind of like endlessly replayable feature that people can like fuck with. And I also get really nervous because the DLC is going to be a kind of horde mode thing. And like, I understand that, you know, a horde mode is easy. Like it's not easy, but it's like, that's the obvious choice for like the first DLC. Cause like you can reuse assets and like kind of like recolor things and have like an arena, and that's all you really need. But you know, I don't think that's going to be to the game's benefit. Rebecca, you seem like you have some thoughts.
I blame Todd Howard. I've never forgiven Todd Howard for Skyrim coming out in 2011 with the Radiant Quest system that at the time was like, whoa, isn't this crazy? The game is always going to have quests for you. And it feels like ever since then, every fucking game has been that way, of like this crazy never-ending bullshit of it keeps generating you to go back to old places again and again and again and again for like no real reason other than that the game wants to be endlessly playable. And not all games need to be endlessly playable.
Well, and I'm sure they knew what their strength was. Like, there's so much writing in this game, like, that's not core to the story, but is just like, oh, here's some fun ephemera. Like, I'm sure the writers were like, we have enough here to... Like, if they just took out, wrenched all those systems out, like, I think... And then just doled them out at, like, oh, you get a weapon upgrade here. You do a side mission, you get a weapon upgrade. Like, I think the game would have been just as strong. So...
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
I do want to say, like, the part where you fly, where you get the ability to fly, is transcendent. Like, I think that, like, when you're like, fuck, I can just fly. I can just go places. And then there's, like, little secrets hidden in the world where it's like, oh, here's a little chest up here that you would never have gotten to if you hadn't come back and flown. Like, that's just such a cool, you know, just such a cool movement feature. Rebecca, what were you going to say?
I mean, to that point, I think to me, that was when the game... I went like it was the moment happened, and I was like, I get it now. Like, I get it. This all makes sense. And the ability to go new places tricked me into thinking the house was shifting when it wasn't. I think I wanted the house to keep shifting really, really badly because that's how it was sort of advertised, and it kind of did that in the beginning and then never again.
Mm-hmm.
And yet somehow the fact that I got to go places I hadn't gone before confused my brain, and I started thinking that the house was shifting and I wasn't paying attention. And so I'm like endlessly looping back through areas trying to find like, oh, the holes behind the posters that have a picture of a hole in the wall on them, and like, oh, I could get to this thing now, and I'm going back through all of the doors. And I feel like the fact that the game does all of those things, it causes you to revisit old areas because of the way it doles out powers and doles out clearance levels and stuff like that. Basically means that if you didn't have the bureau alerts, it would be fine because you'd still have a fucking reason to go back and explore.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to touch on, Tyler, you brought this up when we talked about difficulty spikes, was the fact that the game ran like ass on your PC.
Yeah.
And Olivia, I know that you were on a base PS4. I was on a PS4 Pro, and I'm under the impression that across the board the game runs like the pits. Is that the case, Olivia? I know this was, I think, really particularly important to you.
I think one of the things that a couple of the issues I noticed off the bat were is like texture popping. So like there would be parts where you're like, you know, walking through, like especially the portraits of Jesse, when it's like you're walking through and it's like, oh, this is just, you can't tell what this is. It's kind of just like a weird blob. And then I was like, I guess there's just a really low res texture was what I originally thought. And you'd wait like a minute or like turn around and turn back. And you're like, okay, there's actually something here that you can read. And it sucks because there's so many fun little posters around that I kind of just have to like sit there, wait for it to load. And that game just looks blurry, like on the base PS4. And I don't know what it looks like on the Pro, but it's just a blurry mess. And it drops down to like 15 frames a second, and it's really inexcusable. You know, like that. If you're gonna put something on a platform, I strongly feel that it should work competently. You know, like it should at least hit 30 frames a second consistently. You know, there might be a dip here or there, but you know, that's like I have a really hard time recommending this game to people because I'm like, it's not gonna run great. I would have a high-end PC if you're gonna play this game. Tyler, what was your experience like?
So I think the case is this is a next gen game and it's still in our late gen.
We're killing these consoles,
right? Because I know it's like the newest game with like ray tracing in it, so everyone's like, oh my god, this game is so beautiful on my ultra deluxe PC with, you know, no reserve for power or anything like that. It's, you know. On my computer, which was top of the line like a year ago, like I had no problems with video games generally. I had to run it on like low to medium settings, and then like I had the issue, Olivia, you were talking about of like things being randomly blurry, and I had to turn the quality filter up to like high, so that way I could like read the post-it notes on the wall and stuff, because that is like environmental storytelling at its best.
Yeah.
And so if you can't read that stuff, like you'll just miss out on like a little bit of stuff, but like it really like makes a space and makes you feel like you are in this huge area that is strange and foreign, and like there used to be life here, but now there's not, or they're hanging up in the air, you know, possessed.
Well, like the technical issues, I think, do a disservice to the art direction of that game. Like you're saying, like there's so much like art in so much high quality art, and then to have this texture pop in where you can't even look at it, or like all of these like really intense particle effects that look super cool, but then whenever I pull out my gun and try to shoot it, I'll drop down to 15 frames a second. I've had the game crash on me twice on the PS4, which is kind of surprising because I generally don't have games crash on me, and it's just like, I don't know. I want to say that this game is great and I love it, but also these technical issues make me feel like, did I really get from a product perspective? Did I really get what I paid for? You know what I mean? Like it's hard to say. In my opinion, it's hard to say.
So not to shift gears completely, but I want to be cognizant of everybody's time and obviously the time of the people listening to us. And so I know we've gone over 2 hours. Obviously, I think we could talk for hundreds of years about this in the ephemera, and I know I said that already. But what's really important to me is that we kind of close out this pod by giving a sort of a shout out to the things that we did really love, because I think, you know, in spite of its flaws, in spite of its questionable design choices, in spite of the fact that it runs like toots on pretty much everything. It goes some places, and I think it goes some really special places that keep us coming back to it again and again. And so I wanted to open the floor for people to talk about like a favorite moment, a favorite takeaway, a favorite thing, whatever that was, whether we've talked about it or not. Olivia, do you want to share something that you really liked?
Yeah, and I want to be clear. Even though I feel like I spoke really negatively about a lot of aspects of this game, but I do truly love it in a way that I don't love other games. Like that, I've just like this was a moment for me just playing through this game. In terms of favorite,
I think you can only be truly critical of things you love.
Right.
So. I think this is all done with love.
Exactly. I think in terms of like a favorite moment, I think a lot about the golden suit room, like the probability room, where basically there's a hidden puzzle. It's not like a named quest, but you're basically trying to get a roulette wheel to land on 7, and there's a bunch of like, oh, read this thing to figure out. You know, like you go through and read a little like text doc that's like, oh, move this fish over here. No, you can't move a fish, but it's like move these things into like the general proximity, turn off all the lights, like, or turn all the lights on and make sure you don't do X, Y, or Z. There's a bunch of different factors, but it's not like a named quest where there's a checkbox. You just kind of have to figure it out. And then if you fuck it up, things just start exploding around you. Like there's a gas tank that just explodes, or like a fire hydrant explodes, or like a random phone call starts going off. And it's just a very fun puzzle. And I like that it trusts the player to just like, you got to figure this out. And I know I fucked it up quite a bit to the point where I had to like reset it because I had just fucked up so many times that it would never give me the right answer. But and then your reward is a fucking kick-ass gold suit. It looks so fly. You look so good in that gold suit.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. So I don't know. Everything about that little tiny quest was just super fun. Rebecca, what was your favorite moment in the game?
Probably really, really predictable, because I know I'm a little bit of a darling shill. I'm really sorry. I really liked his character. I thought he was really well written. Tidbit, allegedly also, because I'm pretty sure I saw this in an interview, so don't quote me, but I think it's true. The story of Control did not originally have that character, but Sam Lake was so determined to have Matthew Peretta come back because Matthew Peretta is the voice of Alan Wake. He wanted to write a character for him in Control, and so that was how Dr. Darling came to be. And so I think he is one of the best written characters in the game. I love the way that he is introduced and the way that his ephemera lives in, like, you'll walk into a room and then his video will start playing. And we get pieces of his sort of mental breakdown offered in parts, and we get like a final message from him, and we sort of at the very end get him reach out to us. But I think and I know you're smiling, so I know you know where I'm going with this. As you're coming out of your like brief moment of being possessed by the hiss and like taking control, so to speak, you visit the Ocean View Motel one more time, and on the television playing in one of those rooms is Dr. Darling's music video, as sponsored by the Venom Bureau Control, in which he sings about how Jesse is dynamite and like really great and totally capable, and it's like just a really goofy, but like it just was so joyous, and it was like a really great crescendo to a moment that I feel like started with the Ashtray Maze and just was like a total rocket into space of like feel good, fuck yeah, party time, I'm in control. And I don't know, I thought that was a great.
He plays a keyboard guitar. He has a keyboard guitar. It's so good.
I know. And it's like he's like such a goofy, he's such a good goofy dad character, and it has like a fake saxophone and like dorky glasses. I don't know, it just like, I think one thing that's great is the game always commits to itself in like every way that it possibly can, and I think that character and the execution of him and how he's portrayed in the game, I think is just so good and just like such a level of joy. So I'll continue to be a darling shill as long as I can. Tyler, what was your favorite moment and or takeaway, or more than one?
More than one. Let's just say the level design in general is just stunning for this game. Like, the use of space and juxtaposition of things is flawless. Everywhere is completely, even though within the office space, an office is supposed to be like very mundane and repetitive, it's completely different everywhere you go. Every place is its own unique place. Also, my favorite moment was the stoplight Object of Power, which I don't want to spoil for people who haven't played the game yet, but just when you find the stoplight, you'll know what I mean. And then I guess the last thing, which I think we all and everyone enjoys, is the ashtray maze, which Rebecca, you touched on. But like, and again, I won't ruin it for people. Well, I mean, it's a spoiler cast, right? So like, fuck it, they've listened to all the spoils already.
If you've come this far, there's no going back.
It's
now.
the end. You're in 2 hours. The ashtray maze is fucking dope, y'all. Like, not only like the song itself, which is the same people who sang the God of Thunders in Alan Wake, but like just the general, again, level design and like just that whole experience of going through the maze itself was phenomenal. I'd never had so much fun. That was like the epitome of that game. You know, it's really good.
Yeah, it was their Old Gods of Asgard.
Yes, Old Gods of Asgard.
Can I call it?
That's right.
Can I call it just a few more moments that I'm not going to explain them, but just things that I loved that I want to make sure people go experience.
Yes.
The room, the whole mirror puzzle, like the whole mirror
that was
puzzle.
really good too.
That.
It's very good. And then I think underneath that there's the chest in that same area where you open it and you get the surprise. It's like almost a familiar, like not a familiar.
Oh, the one that's.
Yeah. Oh, is that in the archives? Yes, that one.
Yes.
That one fucking sucks.
Yeah.
It fucking sucks, but I love it.
Hated every minute of that one.
And also just like we didn't get a chance to talk about the clock rift. The clock.
No, we didn't talk about.
We didn't talk about Threshold Kids at all. Oh my god.
We didn't talk about Threshold Kids.
Uncle Mr. Bones.
Oh my god.
There's so many good things in this game. The Post-it note room. The room with the
Post-it note room.
So good.
Oh.
I love the commitment to like how frustrated people are working in like a completely anomalous space. Like the Post-it room is a good example of that, but there's another letter on that floor where someone is like, I served in the field, the bathroom shouldn't be gone, someone find the bathroom. It's shifted someplace, I don't know where the executive bathrooms went.
What about the two like rangers with Langston where they talk about in like a robot voice, and then if you get close to them they'll do a little like, should we keep this going? Like, yeah, it's really funny to talk in a robot voice at him. I think they just
Yeah.
There's a lot of good moments in this game.
Yeah. People were coping abnormally well with what was going on.
Yeah, man.
People were really doing okay. I think that there's a did podcast. How are you guys feeling?
It's good to me.
Yeah, I'm excited for our 18-hour one we're gonna do later this year. I'm very excited just to like get into it.
I would love to do a spoiler cast for each chapter.
Oh man, that's a lot.
Well, there's 10 chapters, so that would be at least 10 podcasts, which, if they're each 2 hours long, would be only 20 hours of content. So
5-star podcast, 5-star runtime.
Yeah. I mean,
if you don't have a day's worth of content,
you're not paying us for this. So. All right. Well, this has been the Greetings From podcast. You can find us wherever podcasts are hosted, such as Apple Podcasts, Simplecast, Spotify, and more. Send your questions to greetingsfromcast@gmail.com. You can visit us online at greetingsfrom.zone. Follow us on Twitter at greetingsfrompc. We're on Instagram. We're in the astral plane. You can pick up a hotline and reach us. I don't know. My name is Rebecca Faye, and you can find me on Twitter at Rebecca Faye. Tyler, where can they find you?
You can find me at World Jumping on Twitter.
Olivia, where do you live on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter at LiveJQ.
Everyone wants the big chair, Meg.
Thanks for listening to Greetings From. Our intro and outro music is an edited version of Deep Fried Space Food by Substitute Sandwiches. You can find a link to the song in the podcast description. You can listen to more episodes at greetingsfrom.zone. We are also on Twitter and Twitch at greetingsfrompc and on Facebook at greetingsfromcast. Please leave us a review with your thoughts on iTunes or Google Play. It really helps us. See ya, Space Cowboy.